Good morning once again, everyone. We are officially recording, and that legal disclaimer is now in your chat box. Welcome to your kind of second part two of our program design. Lou Thompson is here with us today and going to be doing a majority of our presentation. I'm going to do a few opening slides and then we will get into it. If you haven't already and you have access to the webinar features, please go ahead and sign in with your organization, your name, and if you'd like to participate in our icebreaker this morning, what is your best self-care tip? I find this is the most difficult part of the year for me, so I love this question. I love learning from everybody on how they get through that kind of low, gray, wintry days that we have right now. As people sign in, I have a couple of good announcements for you all. The AmeriCorps Prime Grant was awarded finally to our organization. And that might not be language that resonates with you, but what it does mean is we can finally get our state contracts out to you all. And those have gone out. They've come from our assistant, Denise Burns, and they've gone to the legal authoritative individual that you identified in your organization that would sign the state contract. So that may or may not be you, but just know that those have gone out and we apologize for what was a pretty extreme delay. Also, probably today is what I'm being told by our fiscal grants officer, Thomas, your fiscal workbook should be going out, and that will go to the individuals that you have designated as fiscal and just program people as backup so that you know it's been distributed. The first invoice package is due on the 15th this month. That's for your January expenses, your first drawdown. If you feel like the turnaround from getting your workbook to that 15th date is too short, let us know. We can do a extension if need be this first time, but we definitely want to get your money out to you. And if you are unsure of what that process looks like, there was a fiscal orientation that is posted on your planning grant page that you can review and ask questions of Thomas and I if you have anything. One of the pieces I like to do every time we meet is just kind of a learning to date. Where are we at? Where have we been? So most of you, unless you're kind of new or being brought into this role, have already participated in your program and fiscal orientation, and hopefully have also been locating, reviewing, and reading some of that initial AmeriCorps guidance. The big first topic around program design we did together was theory of change, logic models, and a little bit on evidence. And we're going to continue that discussion today regarding your program design on performance measures, data collection, and a little bit on evaluation. Next up, we'll be together on February 17th, back on our regular scheduled Thursday meeting. And believe it or not, we're going to take a pause from program design, and we are going to talk about operational opportunities. We do have a spring opportunity, and so some of you may be choosing to apply for an operational grant right in the middle of your planning grant. Some of you may not. That's a choice that's free for you to make. So we'll talk a little bit about the operational grant, and we'll throw in a little bit on partners budgeting and fund development. So we look forward for a little bit different topic next time we're together. And if you've seen your curriculum, you may have noticed that there's kind of questions to consider based on topic. And so we are still kind of on that larger topic of program design. The first handful of questions applied to the last conversation we had. And today, one of the things you may want to think about is kind of the data collection process. What types of agreements may you need? Where are you getting your data? May you need to have partner agreements? How will members and sites be oriented to data collection? And how will you ensure fidelity? So with that, once again, welcome to everybody. If you do have the webinar features and wouldn't mind signing in, that's super helpful for me later on. Thank you for what I see coming in. Lots of sleep for our icebreaker question. Yes, that is huge, isn't it? And good sleep. Waking up early, having ample time to start the day. Oh, everyone did sign in. There was a lot of chit chat going on. Thank you for that. My chat box wasn't keeping up. And finally, some good coffee always helps. Thank you, everyone. With that, I will welcome back Lou, and I turn it over to you, Lou.
Thanks, Robin. Good morning, everyone. I definitely see some names here that I didn't see a couple weeks ago, so I'll just quickly introduce myself a little. I am Lou Thompson, and I use they, them, or she, her pronouns. I'm the performance management analyst with SAR Washington, and I support the program officer team in these specific areas, the areas that we're going to cover today and the ones that we talked about a couple weeks ago, which were theory of change, data, and statistics, evidence, logic models. That was the other piece, sorry, that we talked about last time. So that's my area, and we have a very full agenda similar to a couple weeks ago. So we've got a little break in the middle, but do expect to be here till right around 12. And know that questions are welcome at any time, either in the chat. I think Robin can help me monitor the chat, or you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask questions. I have edited bits and pieces of these webinars that were developed by AmeriCorps, and I've tried to make them as interactive as possible. But sometimes that can also, make it hard to predict how long it's going to take. So on the slide, we have our topics for today, which Robin also mentioned a minute ago. So we'll talk about performance measures and how that fits in with your logic model and the things that we covered last time, as well as some data collection and just briefly about evaluation. Thankfully, evaluation is not something you will have to worry about for a while, but there are things that you can do to prepare. So we want to be able to talk about the way that you can build a foundation for a future evaluation, even though you're not going to be required to do an evaluation within your first 3-year grant cycle. If you choose to apply for a 3-year operational grant, an evaluation wouldn't be expected until further down the line. So let's get started with high quality performance measures. This module focuses on the core concepts and principles that AmeriCorps uses to ensure its programs have high quality performance measures. And you can choose between developing your own performance measures, or you can select from national performance measures that AmeriCorps has kind of predetermined. And there is a list in the instructions. But either way, you want to identify measures that are most appropriate to your program so you can report your accomplishments with confidence and demonstrate how your program is meeting the community need that you set out to address. So performance measurement is a tool that you can use both to manage your program and to tell the story of your program. So we're going to review some of these concepts and look at how performance measurement is different from evaluation. And then we'll focus on how you can ensure that your performance measures are high quality. And a large focus, just like last time, is about alignment and making sure that all the different parts are very well aligned, that your logic model is aligned with your performance measures, is aligned with your theory of change, and they all are telling the same sort of story. So here is a logic model, which we covered 2 weeks ago. And so this is just an example of where do performance measures come from? So basically they should be part of your logic model, and you only need to have one aligned measure. So that means one output and one corresponding outcome. So most programs in your logic model, you'll probably have a number of outputs, a number of outcomes, and we don't expect you to measure and report on every single one of those. What we're looking for in your performance measures is to choose one aligned set. So you would, as you see on the the slide, we're talking about like AmeriCorps members and what sort of intervention they're doing. And then if they do that intervention, what's the output that you're expecting to see? And then the corresponding outcome. So we're not measuring everything in there, but you get to pick. And generally, we would encourage you to choose like what do you have the most members doing, and what's your primary intervention? Uh, we would recommend measuring that and reporting on that. And we'll get into what that looks like in just a second. And so evaluation, just to delineate the difference here, would be there are different types of evaluations, but if you're doing an outcome evaluation, we would be looking at a specific outcome and probably more like a medium or maybe even a long-term outcome. And you would evaluate your progress, the progress of your program in meeting that maybe more medium term or bigger outcome. So that's just an example there. And when we're talking about performance measurement, we're not trying to prove anything. We're not trying to say that this intervention caused the outcome. It's just a snapshot to show that this change did occur. We don't know, we can't prove that it's because of the program, what our program is doing, but we do know that it occurred. Whereas impact evaluation is more looking to try to prove that, to try to show that it was your program that caused that outcome. So let's do a quick recap. I think we covered this last time when we were talking about logic models, but let's go back a little. So when we're talking about performance measurement, we mean this, it's an ongoing systematic process of tracking your program's outputs and outcomes. And by output, we mean the specific amount of service provided. So they measure the completion of activities and document the fact that individuals received services, products were created, or programs were developed. They answer the questions like, how much service did we perform, or what products did we develop? They don't answer what changed as a result of the service provided or product developed. That question is more for outcomes. So let's talk a little about outcomes. Your outcomes really reflect the changes that are occurring, or the benefits that occur. That could be a change in an individual, organization, community, or if you're an environmental program, the environment. It can include changes in attitudes, knowledge, behaviors, or conditions. So for example, changes within an organization may include an enhanced system to better serve community members. Outcomes answer the question, what difference did our service make for beneficiaries? So there are different types of outcomes, which we just briefly mentioned. So let's look at that in a little more detail. So those are changes in attitude or belief, knowledge or skill, behavior, or condition. And outcomes regarding attitude and belief involve a change in thought or feeling. So an example of this would be, say, a caregiver believes that she has more social support now after receiving respite services. And an outcome that measures knowledge and skill involves a change in understanding or ability, what a person learns. For example, a student who improves their reading ability after attending tutoring. And if we're talking about behavior, we're talking about changes in actions such as conduct or habits, often in a specific context. So an example of this could be a student who improves their class participation according to teachers after participating in a school mentoring program. And an outcome regarding condition involves a change in situation or circumstance. For example, That could be a family is transitioned into safe, affordable housing after receiving referrals and counseling, or maybe a community receives a new after school program because a youth organization has been able to build its capacity to provide services. So next we have a little exercise for you all. Let's explore examples of outcomes like that we just talked about um, in the education focus area. So on the slide, there's a list of outcomes, and your job is to say where do you think each of these would fall? You can type it in the chat or unmute. And the first one is increased school attendance. Do you think that's an attitude, belief, knowledge, skill, behavior, or condition? I'm seeing quite a few people answering behavior. You got it. Great. How about increased interest in school? Where would that one? I'm seeing attitude coming in. Right. Perfect. And how about successful completion of high school? Thanks, Robin. I see Robin putting correct in the chat. Yep, people are answering condition. That is correct. These are too easy. How about improved math ability? There's only one left. Knowledge, right? Great. So you all are on it. Thanks for that participation. Then we can continue on. So as we're creating outcomes, these are some of the things to keep in mind to really zero in on. Make sure that they're meaningful, ambitious, yet realistic, and that they clearly articulate the type of change that you hope to see. And do keep in mind that you need to be able to measure this for each year of program activity. So even though your grant cycle will run for 3 years, you're tracking your performance measures every year. So whatever goal you set, whatever outcome you're hoping to meet, that needs to be an outcome that you think you can realistically meet within one program year of activity. So let's talk a little more about trying to ascertain how meaningful an outcome might be. It really is a subjective exercise, but let's look at some criteria. So first, is the outcome a compelling and significant change in the lives of beneficiaries? Is the outcome getting at the key change that you want to occur? So again, you're thinking back to your theory of change and the community need problem that you identified. It's really common to want to know it all and have this really long list of interesting outcome measurement questions that you want to pursue. However, the selected performance measure outcome should not only respond directly to the identified need or problem, but do so in a meaningful way, in a powerful, substantial way. And it shouldn't be peripheral to the theory of change, but really directly related. So consider the beneficiaries first. Is the target audience receiving the service identified in the outcome? There could be multiple groups that benefit from the service you provide. There could be community volunteers, maybe even your AmeriCorps members or others, but make sure that the outcome focuses on the target population identified in the need. And then there's the scope of the outcome. Think about how many people will benefit. Consider the number of people you believe will achieve the outcome. Given the need and context, will a a sufficient number of beneficiaries experience the intended change? And then the magnitude. How much change can you expect among those served? Not only are you looking for a change, but you also will want to consider the level of change. Is the outcome target you identified worth the effort that it will take your program? Are your national service participants spending a lot of time and effort working for this change? Or are they doing something else more important? And if so, maybe you want to measure that. And what about the evidence? Is there evidence for the intervention that you've chosen? Remember from the theory of change that your choice of intervention should be supported by evidence that shows a cause and effect relationship between the intervention and the intended outcome. Okay, now let's move to the next one. Your outcomes should also be ambitious but realistic. So you do want to ask yourself, is the outcome too modest? The outcome should be ambitious enough to address the problem and should produce a discernible improvement in it. But be careful not to choose an outcome, but because it's really easy to measure, but maybe doesn't reflect the important change your program seeks. A common program misstep is to focus on an outcome that appears really convenient to measure, but maybe isn't as compelling. And on the flip side, you don't want the outcome to be unrealistic or unachievable either. So you can aim too low, but you can also aim too high. So we've got to find that middle ground. An outcome selection should consider the program timeframe, which, as I said, needs to be measurable within the annual grant period. The outcome should keep in mind the severity of the problem being addressed and take into account your program resources. While your program should strive to have ambitious and compelling outcomes, this does have to be balanced with staff time, member time, and expertise that's needed to achieve these outcomes. So program resources aren't just about capacity to measure, they're also about the capacity to produce certain kinds of outcomes given the resources for the intervention, the design, and the dosage of the intervention. For example, a program in which mentors engage with their assigned student once a month for 2 hours for 6 months couldn't expect to see the same outcome as a program that has mentors spending 3 hours a week with their mentees for 12 months. So, in addition to being meaningful and realistic, the outcome measure should be clearly aligned with the type of outcome you're measuring. So, are you hoping your outcome responds to a change in attitude, a skill, a behavior, or a condition? And is it the same one that you identified in the theory of change? For instance, a project that works on educating the public about the regional flora and fauna of the county park should revisit their theory of change if the outcome is increased environmental activism. The intervention addresses knowledge gains, but the outcome addresses behavior. And before you begin to consider instruments, the outcome needs to accurately and clearly embody the type of outcome information you're seeking. For example, an early childhood education project that helps children with kindergarten readiness. The project's outcome in this example is that the children will improve their pre-math readiness. And this is a knowledge skill outcome, right? However, at the program's planning meeting, staff discover that the data they've been collecting are about how much the kids enjoy the pre-math activities and if the children think the pre-math concepts are fun, which are attitudes, right? So in this case, the project has drifted from looking at a knowledge skill outcome to a less central focus on attitudes. So you need to be really clear on the type of outcome you're measuring so you can identify the right data source and instrument. Yeah, now got it. You got it, Robin. I saw some back and forth. Okay, so let's consider how to ensure strong alignment within a set of performance measures. So in this case, we're talking about between the output measure and an outcome measure. And we will have a couple activities right after this. So when we talk about an aligned set of performance measures, we're referring to the link between output and outcome. And the outcome results from the output. So alignment also means that the output you're measuring is produced by the intervention. For example, if the intervention is that National Service participants build trails, then the output would track the miles of trails that are built. And an aligned output and outcome measure the same intervention and the same beneficiaries. By measuring outputs along with outcomes, programs have the context for reporting, and then we'll know their level of success. So of those served, how many change? For instance, if the output is that 100 children complete an early education program, and the outcome is 75 of those children improve numeracy skills, the output establishes the pool of beneficiaries we're looking to change. In this example, the level of success is that 75 out of 100 of the children improve numeracy skills. So let's look at a couple examples and you can decide if the output and outcome are aligned, or in this case, if the intervention and the output are aligned. So here is a housing example. A study identified inaccessible and unsafe housing as a major problem among people with disabilities in the community. So in response, a national service project organized a housing repair intervention modeled after effective housing programs in other counties. The project takes requests from individuals with disabilities living in unsafe or inaccessible housing. With the help of community volunteers, the project then plans and completes construction work on those homes. So the output tracks the number of economically disadvantaged individuals with disabilities that receive necessary upgrades and repairs to their homes. The outcome tracks the number of volunteers on the construction team that improve their construction skills. So the first question is whether you believe that intervention and output align. That is the output likely to result from the intervention? And you can put it in the chat, just kind of yes or no. You could say why or why not. That'd be helpful. Or you can unmute. I see Brian replied in the chat. Any others? And let's, I think you're spot on, Brian, but in this one, let's look, kind of ignore the outcome for just briefly and look at the intervention and the output. Do you see alignment between those two pieces? Yes. Okay. I'm seeing some that the intervention and output are aligned. That's correct. It is logical to assume that participation in a well-designed and well-implemented project offering housing construction service will lead to the completion of housing upgrades and repairs for the individuals with disabilities. Excellent. So then the next question is, how about the output and outcome? And we've got a great answer from Brian, that the outputs are focusing on community members while the outcome is focused on members. So no, they're not aligned because we're talking about two different groups of beneficiaries. Well done. Thank you. All right. Now we can talk for a moment about the benefits of having performance measures. So first, I'm still getting to know all of you and your programs and your program designs, but I know for many AmeriCorps programs, they recruit and select sites. So performance measurement can be a really great way to help you define expectations for sites and also give you another way to assess which sites will best be able to implement the selected intervention that your program uses and help you use your resources wisely. Um, And by the way, the baby animal photos that you will see sprinkled throughout the rest of this presentation are included purely for your enjoyment. Another reason to track performance measures is that the data feeds into reports that you do for Serve Washington, or that you will do. And for AmeriCorps and other stakeholders, results can be used to promote your program or project, maintain or strengthen buy-in from local stakeholders, and make the case for continued support or new resources. So now we'll talk a bit about data collection. Once you identify what you intend to measure, then it's time to consider, where are you going to get your data? To identify data sources, you'll begin by identifying a list of as many possible places that you can access data in order to answer your measurement questions, as many places as you can think of. And then identify a preferred data source. This could be those who actually experience or witness the change, and consider how you might gain access to this sort of data. And if the preferred data source is not accessible, then consider others on your list. It can be helpful to think through several data sources, including the preferred one, along with the pros and cons of each source. And there is a really helpful handout we'll review in a little bit about data sources to consider. So to some extent, the choice of data source depends on the type of change that you want to measure. In the case of attitudes or knowledge, it's best to get the data directly from those experiencing the change. The questions about attitudes can be really subjective, and they're asking people about how people feel about something. So knowledge is a bit more objective. A person either knows something or not. In the case of behavior or conditions, the data can come from those experiencing the change, from other observers, or sometimes from secondary sources. Like knowledge, behavior, and conditions are objective forms of information. The behavior or conditions exist independent of a person's beliefs or feelings. They're also often accessible to external observers. Where to find instruments? Once you decide on some potential sources, you can find or develop an instrument. There are so many ways to do this, including internet searches. Maybe if you've been working in a particular field for a while, you may already know something about the field's best measurement practices. Maybe you've been doing what you're doing for quite a while and you already have tools developed, or you have colleagues in your field that you can reach out to. You could look at recent research to get ideas about appropriate measurement approaches. And if you have been doing the intervention that you're proposing, you can look at the evidence from your own program. How has the outcome been measured by your program or similar programs, people in your professional network? And the best ways to measure an outcome are often really specific to a particular focus area or intervention. So we do have a PDF, and Robin, if you are able to pull up that PDF about performance measurement instruments, we'll just walk through this really quickly. And this is a resource that we'll share out with you. It's from AmeriCorps, the agency. They developed it a number of years ago, but I personally really like it and how they provide all these options. Yeah, you can keep scrolling, Robin. Thank you for showcasing this. here's the first part that I really like. It asks you to consider the type of information that you're needing to collect, and then they suggest methods for collecting that information. So you can see, like, are you wanting to assess knowledge or skills? Then you might consider using a test or an observation. Let's see, what does the next page show, Robin? Yeah, and you can choose, um, if we talked about knowledge, attitudes, behavior, conditions. So if you know that your outcome is in this, the area of knowledge or the area of attitudes, then it offers some direct measures for that and some maybe less direct measures. And just a number of things to consider as you're developing these instruments. So we don't need to cover the entire document. Um, they do have some I think some detail about surveys, which we'll also talk about and give some examples, because surveys are a really common instrument that we use or that we see in the AmeriCorps world. So we'll talk about a couple of those. But yeah, I just wanted to give you an idea of what was in that document that you might find helpful. So yeah, let's talk a little about if you are using, um, it can be a survey that a participant, a program beneficiary is completing, or maybe even, a teacher observation form that you're wanting a teacher to complete based on students that are being served. In any case, as you're designing this sort of instrument, we want to check to make sure that it's uh, well designed, which, because if it's not, it can really affect your data quality. So there are some issues listed here on the slide. And these are things to look out for. So crowded layouts, asking, two questions in one, questions that are really abstract, that type of thing. And I will go over a couple of those in the next slide. So let's look at the first one. So there's a little more context. So the problem here at the top of the slide is this very crowded layout. It can make it difficult to read and be just potentially confusing. So the layout in the second question is not so crowded. It's easier to read and understand. And again, we'll just go through these really quickly, but I thought they were helpful tips to consider. And double-barreled questions is something that I commonly see on surveys, where we're asking kind of two questions at once. How do teachers and students at your school feel about the mentoring program? The example reads, but the question really, like, what the teachers feel and what the students feel could very likely be very different things. So a solution is to pose these as separate questions. Here's an example of a biased or leading question. The first question, has the mentoring program improved how you feel about going to school? The way that it's worded introduces this kind of subtle positive bias. It's almost like the questioner is expecting that there's going to be some improvement. The second question is posed in a more neutral way, so it's more likely to yield unbiased responses. So abstract or broad questions, sometimes responses might not be very meaningful if the question is too abstract or broad. So rather than asking questions such as, did you enjoy the mentoring program? You might ask something like, would you recommend the mentoring program to other students? It's a little more concrete, action oriented. And here is, this might be our last tip, is about structured responses versus unstructured. So both can be helpful, but we have to be really strategic which one we choose. The first question asks respondents to write in their own answers, which can increase the burden on responses, especially when a checkbox response would work just fine. It's more likely to result in the question being left blank and makes more work for whoever's doing the analysis, because then you have to convert the written responses to a standardized format for analysis. So just another thing to pay attention to. And here are some final things to consider when selecting an outcome instrument. Is the instrument age appropriate? This is something that I've seen a lot, where I'll see a survey for a program will use the same survey for kindergartners and first graders that they're using for sixth and seventh graders. Um, and maybe, it's they're really at different reading levels, at different education levels. Um, so definitely consider your audience and the language they speak, etc. So here is just a summary of the key points we just covered. Performance measurement is a systematic process of measuring progress through outputs and outcomes. And remember, outputs are the amount of service completed, while outcomes are the change that occurred. And performance measurement isn't seeking to prove a causal relationship between the intervention and outcome, but it is providing a snapshot of progress and shows that a change did occur. And evaluation, on the other hand, is more what we would go to if we're looking to prove something with our outcomes. So finally, strong performance measures align with the theory of change. So your program's identified need, your chosen intervention, and the intended outcome. The intervention is based on evidence that supports a cause and effect relationship between the intervention and the intended outcome. So look to your theory of change to identify appropriate outcomes. And also, your theory of change is what identifies your logic model. So your logic model should be kind of a snapshot of your theory of change. So you would refer to both of those sections and ensure alignment among all of them. I think we are doing good on time. I'm very excited. And we want to promote self-care, as I love our icebreaker this morning. So there is a 10-minute break with an optional 1-minute activity. Is just a potential resource that you might enjoy. I personally find this like really, really grounding and calming. So it's a quick exercise. Robin will play it, and we will come back. Let's say 10:58. We'll come back. Also, if you have any questions, put them in the chat, or we can take them when we come back. But let's go ahead and take our 10-minute break, and Robin will play the 1-minute activity.
I will get that going. Lou, if you want to drop that time in the chat box there you go, 10:58, and I will get this going.
Thank you. I see we are at 10:58. I'm hoping folks are back and ready to go into the final stretch of our presentation here. We'll be talking about evaluation. And again, feel free if you have any questions on the content that's already been covered to drop questions in the chat or ask me to pause and we can talk about whatever might come up. In the meantime, let's go ahead and go on with evaluation. So we'll do kind of an overview of the requirements and talk about the different elements that you can begin now to lay the foundation for future evaluation. So during this planning grant and pre-award time period, you have a while until your program would be expected to start. So this is the time for you to do whatever you can to set your program up for success. And we understand that there is a lot of variation in how programs use this planning time. Some programs have been in existence for many years and are just adding AmeriCorps members. Some programs are totally new and may have varying levels of resources that they can devote to planning for a grant that they may or may not get, and many other situations that programs could be in. But if you can devote any time or resources to this, we encourage you to do so. The planning period is a time to think through risks and threats to implementation and mitigate those. Since programs are expected to begin collecting data immediately in year one of an operational grant, we do encourage you to start developing your data collection systems and performance measurement plans during the planning phase to the extent that's realistic for you. So let's just briefly cover the key evaluation requirements. When applying for your first 3-year cycle, I think I didn't update this slide. We do, for planning grantees, ask that you submit a data collection plan as part of your planning grant. But Robin, you can double check me here, but we are not asking that a data collection plan be submitted with a formula grant application. Is that correct? Do I need to update this slide? Robin is saying yes in the chat. Okay. Thank you, Robin, for confirming.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe the best way to say it is that it can change from request for grant application to different request for grant applications. So
Right.
while this year we decided not to ask for it because we got so many during the planning grant cycle from the last cohort, it's always good to know that your request for grant application and the opportunity will actually outline what is required. So you may be required to submit a data collection plan in the first 3-year application process. Right now, we're not leaning in that direction.
Thank
But you
you.
get to work on it during your planning grant period anyways, so it's covered.
Right. Okay. And so say you get this full operational grant and you have an AmeriCorps program for a full 3-year cycle, and you are up to recompete and ask for a second 3-year cycle. At that point, you would submit an evaluation plan. And when you begin that second 3-year cycle, you would complete your evaluation as planned. So that proposal that you submitted with your recompete application, you would then do the evaluation, which should cover a year of your AmeriCorps program activity. It doesn't have to cover all 3 years of activity, but 1 year within that 3-year cycle. And then when you apply, if you were to go for a third 3-year cycle, you would then submit an evaluation plan for the next cycle and the evaluation report of the evaluation that you completed in that cycle. Um, I'm looking in the chat and there's a question about asking, wouldn't you say a data collection plan is a best management practice regardless of whether it's required or not? And as Robin says in the chat, absolutely. That is well said. So we definitely agree with that, that it
Hey,
is the
Lou,
best management practice. Yes.
I think this is where sometimes, and I try to remember to write this down every year and I forgot, but I think this is where we sometimes have questions or we'll lose folks, especially new to this whole notion, because we have moved away from talking about performance measures, which is what you covered in the first half. And
Right.
so the performance measures do occur in the first 3-year cycle. And we don't have that on this little beautiful slide in front of you, but do know that you'll be doing your non-causal annual performance measures within that first 3-year cycle.
Yes. Thank you for that clarification. Yep, that performance measures will start right away. It's just the evaluation that comes a little later. And again, this is just to kind of give an idea of what to expect in the future, some of the additional requirements. So if you have a grant where on the AmeriCorps side you're getting less than $500,000 each year, then you basically can do whatever sort of evaluation you would like. It can be a process evaluation, outcome evaluation. You can have your own staff do it. You could hire someone. You could have a grad student do it. Your choice. But if you do receive more than 500,000, then the requirements get a little more specific, and we will definitely cover that more, and we'll make sure that you are well aware with plenty of time in advance. But just wanted to give a brief overview of that ahead of time. So now we're going to just briefly discuss each of these 6 activities that lay the foundation for future evaluation. So we'll start with the first one, program design and implementation. The goal with that first one is to improve your program design and ensure that your program is being implemented effectively. So this means refining your logic model, assessing how implementation of your program is going, and possibly conducting a more formal process evaluation if that would be helpful for you. And you would use the resulting data to adjust your program model as needed. And the weaker or less well defined your model is, the more difficult it might be to ensure that you're implementing it effectively. A poorly defined program model can be really difficult to evaluate down the road. So it's okay if implementing the program causes you to learn that some parts of your model maybe aren't working so well. Maybe they're not very realistic. For example, say that you implement your program and collect data on that implementation process, and the data shows that beneficiaries require a more intensive intervention. Maybe they need more one-on-one time with members, for example, than you originally expected. Your program might decide to spend more time serving fewer people than you originally proposed in your logic model. The logic model in your application may be your best or ideal version, but know that the model may change and is very likely to change as you begin implementation. It's important to document those changes and update your logic model as those changes occur. So here's another example. Suppose that member timesheets show that sites are providing more training than you expected, and your program analyzes the data and learns that it's because sites are having to provide follow-up training to address certain concepts that members didn't master in their initial orientation. With the training component of the program model, you might decide to change that to reflect what you've learned. Or the program can standardize additional training across all sites, or maybe you decide to change what's offered at orientation. So those are just some of the things that you might be looking at and deciding to adjust in those first years. So number 2, build and refine data collection systems. So as we've discussed from day 1, or even before, during the planning phase, it's really important to have systems in place to collect and manage high quality program data. So you'll want to figure out how you want to collect data. That toolkit that we showcased earlier is a really helpful guide you to help you build your data collection systems, and then put a system in place to manage the data. So you'll need to figure out how you're going to access other administrative data if that's applicable, and in all cases, ensure that the data you collect is high quality. You'll need a data management system that can store your data, allow you to access it and use it for program improvement, reporting, and decision making. Sometimes this can be really costly or not. Low cost tools that we see really often are Google Docs, Microsoft Excel, and those sorts of resources that are very widely available. Excel even has some pretty sophisticated data analysis options, so it should be able to accomplish the analytic needs for most programs that we see. And we do have a couple examples that we will pull up of some Excel documents that our programs use for tracking performance measurement data. So you shouldn't just be collecting and reporting performance measurement data to serve Washington and AmeriCorps. We really want you to use that data for program improvement. So in order to achieve your program goals, you need to know whether or not your goals are being met. Good measures can help you understand how your program is working. For example, let's say you want to understand more about program implementation, specifically member training. You could create a performance measure that looks at member knowledge gains at pre-service and in-service training sessions. These data can help you understand a key component of your program, member training, specifically how it is implemented. And if you aren't achieving targets on this measure, you would know that member training is not being implemented as designed, and you could work to improve it so that targets are met. Performance management should be a continuous feedback loop where you measure, analyze, identify improvements, make programmatic decisions grounded in data, and then strengthen implementation as needed, and kind of go back through that cycle. Performance measures should be collected on an ongoing basis and compared to a target level, whereas an evaluation, as we discussed, is designed to answer specific research questions about the goals of an intervention. So despite these differences, the two activities are related and should be aligned. Importantly, as I think we've covered, performance measurement is an ongoing, all the time, every year. It starts right away and it doesn't stop. Even when you are doing an evaluation, your performance measurement doesn't end. You keep going. So well-chosen performance measures could be the basis for future evaluation activities. For example, maybe you have outcome measures that you could extend the timeline or expand them somehow. Your data collection instruments used for performance measures can often be used or adapted for evaluation. And reflecting on performance measures data can help you decide what you want to evaluate when the time comes. And from the very beginning, you need to be thinking about how you can build your staff's capacity to collect, manage, and utilize data. And maybe this is already part of your organizational culture and what you do. Maybe it is something that's a little newer for you. Um, but you will need to not only develop staff skills in this area, but assign responsibilities and ensure that staff are aware of their expectations. And often, really, AmeriCorps members are commonly we see being the primary data collectors. So each year there's a lot of training of members about data collection and about performance measures. So it's not just staff capacity and responsibilities, but members as well. We don't expect staff or members to be experts, but we do look for them to be reasonably capable and to know what what they're doing and how to collect high quality data and manage it. And at least one person on staff should have some basic analytic skills. Um, it's also important that responsibilities for data tasks are really clearly defined and assigned. Key tasks need owners so that nothing is missed or overlooked. That's something that we often recommend is having a written like data management or like data collection procedure so that it's really clear who's in charge of what piece and how the data flows. Um, that might be something that you could consider if you don't already have something like that. And so let's pause here and pull up a couple of program examples in Excel. If you are ready, Robin, maybe you could pull up the client tracking sample first. Great. So this, like I mentioned, Excel is a super common tool that we see. And this program, there are two tabs. There's one for like intensive, more one-on-one tutoring, where they count, where they're tracking per student the number of minutes of tutoring. And then there's the whole class, where members kind of own these these spreadsheets and put in data that they then are submitting to program staff. So they can track the minutes of tutoring that they're providing to a larger group. So it's and they have, you know, some formulas in there that can just total things up for ease and accuracy. Um, just a really simple example of some of the common tools that we see. So I just wanted to show that, but it doesn't need to be anything super fancy. And then you could pull up, yep, thank you. So I really like this one. This is, it's just like this one tab. You can scroll down a little too. It just has fields for when they're tallying everything up at the end of the year to see like did we meet this benchmark, or we could say outcome. Um, but I really like how at the top they put the performance measure in the tracking tool, so it's very clear what this is related to, what the goal is, what the outcome is, so that anyone who's completing this tool has like the bigger picture. And I've heard that from members when I've gone out on site and talked to members, that sometimes they're filling out these forms and they don't even know, they don't know why. They don't know the performance measure. They don't know what is the goal. Um, so I love how the program put it in here so that everyone can see, every member who's doing this, they know like what is the collective goal that we're working towards. Thank you, Robin. Any questions, anyone? Or if you have other ideas or tips, I'm sure many of you have been doing this type of work for a while. Also open to tips or any sort of software or data system that you use that or that you've heard is really great. Feel free to drop that in the chat.
Lou, I just want to also appreciate how easily lost in translation sometimes these things get from grant application to implementation. Sometimes the grant writers are the ones,
Mm,
doing that application almost a year in advance sometimes, and then by the time folks are actually going to implement it, it's amazing how many times we send out a report that says, "Okay, tell us about your performance measures," and folks may not be aware about what their performance measures are. So it is nice to have it outside of the grant application.
yeah.
And then just another tip, I don't know if you want to speak to this, but we are seeing a movement away from percentage-based outcomes, which I think that tool had like a
Hmm.
70%
Right.
based outcome, and we're looking at doing actual numbers versus percentages. So 70 of 100 or 250 of 500 or something of that nature. Is that still accurate?
Yes, you're correct. That could be a good note to myself to update that because we generally don't use percentages. We want to see like the actual like target number, if that's 250 or whatever, 70. Yes. um, we stay away from percentages. All right. Well, the chat box is quiet, so I will just keep going. We have just a couple slides left, and then we will wrap up. So um, we will be done by 12. I'm very excited. So now we'll cover the last two foundational elements, evaluation planning and becoming a learning organization. So toward the end of the first grant cycle, you'll be developing a plan for your first evaluation, which will be executed in your second grant cycle. Since that is a ways away, we are not really going to focus our attention on that now. Just know that AmeriCorps does have many courses on each aspect of the evaluation process, all available on the evaluation resources page. So they have many webinars and trainings on Litmos, that first link. And then the second one is where there are just a number of other evaluation resources, the evaluation FAQs and a link to the evidence exchange. Um, so those are just two spots you can go if you want to learn more. But also in Litmos, not just about evaluation, but about theory of change, logic model, performance measures. It has all of it there. So that Litmos page is not specific to evaluation. So the last foundational element to be aware of starting now is the concept of learning organizations and beginning to implement the steps to become a learning organization. So what we mean by that are those sorts of organizations that create, they acquire and transfer knowledge and modify their behavior to reflect new insights. The learning organizations remain relevant and effective because they can continuously improve their programs based on data available through things like performance measurement and program evaluation. So by engaging in performance measurement, you can collect the data that you need to remain competitive in this field, justify increases in your scale or scope, and demonstrate accountability to stakeholders, build an evidence base for demonstrating program efficacy. So the key takeaway here is that by doing performance measurement and evaluation activities, you are ultimately enhancing your ability to make decisions that use data with the ultimate goal of improving your services. So we don't want this to be an added burden. We don't want it to be a box that you check, but really we want for you to think through what data is really going to help you learn and grow and better serve the community that you set out to serve. And you get to decide what that data is. And even I highly recommend getting the input of the community, community members, community beneficiaries, stakeholders of your programs, um, getting input into what's meaningful to them, and use that input to set your goals and what and outcomes that you want to reach. Okay, so we've covered those 6 foundational elements, and just to recap, um, these are the sort of milestones that we're hoping that by the end of your first grant cycle you would have, is that you would refine your program and ensure that it's being implemented effectively, and you by then will have built and tested and refined your data collection systems, and you're collecting some high quality performance measurement data and using that data for improving your program. Your staff have the capacity and have very clear assigned responsibilities related to data tasks. And by the end of that first cycle, you will have prepared your first evaluation plan. And you are well on your way to becoming a learning organization. That is our hope. So if you have been able to make good progress on these foundational elements, you will be set up for success. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I will turn it over to Robin, who is going to talk about homework.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, Lou, someone suggested Microsoft
Mm,
Access as a possible platform. I don't know much about Access. Do you?
I don't. I will have to look. I will, I'm very curious to look into that now. I,
Yeah.
I am not.
As described, it does sound like it would be very useful, and suitable.
Mhm.
Any
Okay.
questions for Lou before we close out and remind folks of homework and next steps? Any questions? Well, thank you very, very much, Lou, and we'll watch for folks that may still be typing, or you're welcome to come off your audio. As we wrap up, just a reminder, that curriculum document is something you're going to want to refer to every once in a while, specifically at the time in which we assign homework. So last time we talked about developing a theory of change and logic model and gave out some templates that may be helpful. And so now it's time to kind of continue to do that while expanding and thinking through which aspects of your program are best measured annually. So maybe those outputs and short-term outcomes in your logic model, and which may be better saved for a later, much later evaluation, such as a medium or long-term outcome, something that's best suited for a long-term research agenda. I really like the visual logic models in this slide deck where it kind of circles what is a performance measure and what is more of an evaluation. We're also going to post the most recent AmeriCorps or CNCS performance measures. It's just so that you can begin to see what national measures look like and see if any of them are interesting to you. As Lou mentioned during the presentation, folks can develop their own measure. We call that an applicant determined measure, but there's also national measures that are pre-written in case that works out and makes it easy for you. And so when reviewing and thinking about those things, that's when you actually put that into practice and define and develop that one aligned measure. And so just to reiterate what Lou had said in the beginning is that your logic model, which is a really quick snapshot, quick visual of your larger theory of change, it contains a lot of information, a lot of outputs, a lot of outcomes. And of that, you only need to select one output and one outcome for a performance measurement. You can have more than one aligned performance measure. Your application will allow for that. We set the bar of quality over quantity, which has not always been the case if you're familiar with the history of AmeriCorps. Folks used to have half a dozen measures that they were working on, but we've really narrowed it down to what is required. There's only one to really focus in on that quality over quantity, but that's up to you. And of course, once you have that information, that's when you want to begin to develop your data collection plan. And so again, we have templates and information that will be posted to help you get through this. You are welcome to use our information and our templates. If you already have organizational ways in which you think of this and construct these things, you are also welcome to submit it how in any visualization or any form that works best for your interpretation and your implementation. So those deliverables, in particular, the theory of change, the logic model, a single performance measure, and a data collection plan. Our goal is end of February. And if you get those going and want to submit them, you can get some feedback from Lou and I during probably the March period. And the reason we have it set that way is because some of you will be immediately using this information to apply for a grant. We also know that you will continue to refine and that these are really living documents. And so this is just kind of the draft point. This is just kind of the point to get some initial feedback. And for those of you applying for an award, this is the time to maybe push you to get things done a little quicker than others might need to. Lou and I's email are there for your reference. And we will end with another opportunity for questions. Thank you again, Lou, and thank you for everyone who was here. I saw some new names. Welcome to some new staff that are joining programs for the first time. Happy to have you. And welcome to those that have now been with us for, gosh, our first month. We've been together for a month now. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and Lou and I will hang out for any post-webinar questions. Thank you, everyone.